So let us have a look at question 1. This is from November 2023. There's text A. There's a glossary. Always look for the glossary. Help with vocabulary. There's text B and a glossary again, and it gives you the text in small font, and we come to the first question. You need to look at your question words and your keywords and the mark allocation. So you might like to take different colors. You might like to mark the question word, the command word, in one color. So if we look at 1.2, it's refer and explain why. So you might like to use one color for that. Then what about the keywords? 1.1, we've got it repeatedly. And don't forget always to look at the paragraph. So the paragraph is really important. There are students who don't look at the right paragraph or the right lines, and they throw away their marks. And then also important is to look at the mark allocation. So you might like to use different colors, use highlighters. It's your paper so that you can focus on what you're being asked. So let's just have a look back at the passage and see, what about it? So we've got presumably the examiners want you to say that it is a pronoun. It usually refers to a noun, because that's what a pronoun does, that has been mentioned before. So either you can answer this by saying, we don't know what it is, so we are intrigued, we are curious, we want to know, what is this it that you do in the middle of the night or in the park? And that, if you look at the marking guidelines, that's what the examiners wanted. But I don't know what they would do with an answer that says listening, audiobooks, podcasts, voice notes. So we know what the it is referring to. It's listening to these various things which you can do in the middle of the night. So if you answered like that, then you would say, we are still intrigued because we want to know more about people's listening habits. But as I say, the marking guidelines simply looked at the idea that you hadn't read the headline and you hadn't read the subheading. Right, now, this one, we've got our question words, listening, and then we've got this. Now, it's really important that part of your answering technique is, what do I do as the candidate when a word or a phrase is put between inverted commas? I must explain that word or that phrase. I must use my own words in the answer to make sure that I have explained it. So you would explain generational shift, and then it's just explain why. So it is not meant to be a difficult question. We are in the lower order questions, the introduction. So this one was out of 1. The next 3 are all out of 2. So you would explain why the generations from your reading of the passage. If we look at 1.3 and 1.4, we are still at 2 marks each. Once again, we look for our question words. What? We look at which line we are told to look at. We look at account for and the line. So what does the writer mean by this expression? Once again, you've got the inverted commas. So you say to yourself, I've got to look at reading instinctively feels like the higher art. I've got to explain that as part of my 2 marks. But what does it mean? It suggests just use your own words. It really isn't meant to be more difficult than that. Own words, you are explaining. What does he mean? You are explaining. But now we come to account for. English teachers love account for. So it's really important that you understand what you have to do. You have to give a reason. So account for is another way of asking why. And what do I have to give a reason for here? The use of the rhetorical question. Remember, you always go back to the paragraph, and they want you to explain that use in the context of that paragraph. Let's just stop and talk about rhetorical questions for a moment. So, obviously, the word rhetorical, if we look for the root, it is rhetoric. We take off the al, we take off the suffix, and we get rhetoric. So what is rhetoric? It is the use of language in order to persuade, effect, manipulate. Manipulate is like control, influence the audience. So rhetoric is when you choose your language and you use your language in order to have a very definite and specific effect on your audience. So what is a rhetorical question? It's a question that is used to persuade, to effect, to manipulate, and to influence. Now, I know that there are many teachers who say a rhetorical question is a question that doesn't need an answer. Please stop using that in an exam. First of all, for 1.4, you're not being asked what is a rhetorical question. You're being asked why this rhetorical question. And you cannot just say it doesn't need an answer. Why doesn't it need an answer? Because it is designed to influence, persuade, manipulate you. So you will go back to paragraph 3 and you will look at what are we talking about here? But is that fair? What is it? What is the that? So you go back to that context. Just look, though, at that question. If I say, but is that fair? What am I suggesting? That it's not fair. And I'm trying to get you to agree with me. So you go back and find out what that is, and then say that the writer wants to influence the reader to agree that whatever it is not fair. To get the reader on their side, or to get their reader thinking about why it isn't fair. A rhetorical question is designed to make you think the way the person who uses the rhetorical question is thinking. That's its purpose. So you need to say, what is the writer trying to make me think? And then say the rhetorical question is trying to make me think blah, whatever it is. What is our key word? Discuss. You could have comment on. So we've moved from what and explain to discuss and comment on. What do you have to do? You have to give your own opinion about something. Give your own judgment. So usually the question will start with your explaining whatever it is, and then you add your opinion to it, which becomes the discussion. Notice that we've shifted to 3 marks. So in this question, what is our question? What is our key word? Irony. Don't forget to look at the right paragraph. How do you answer an irony question? Students battle with irony. Irony always depends on a contrast. So here am I, and I think something, or I hope something, or I believe, or I assume, but something else is the reality. So you're always looking for a contrast between what somebody thinks and what is actually the truth. What somebody hopes for and what happens. What somebody believes and what is reality. What somebody assumes and what is actually going on. So you would go back to paragraph 5, and maybe we should just do that and see if we can seize our irony. This is paragraph 5. Yet the idea prevails, the idea continues, it goes on, that listening is flighty or unserious. So we know the passage is about listening because we read the headline. So flighty means unreliable, untrustworthy, constantly changing, or unserious. A snooty, 55% of respondents, snooty, they think a lot of themselves. Yes, we're better than other people. That's snooty, nose in the air. Respondents to one survey deemed audiobooks thought a lesser way of consuming literature. So we're talking about reading books. Only 10% thought it was okay. The view that listening is cheating, that somehow if you don't read the book, you're cheating. Even though nobody thinks it's lazy for a student to sit through lectures, you obviously listen to a lecture, and going to the theatre is not considered intellectually inferior, and obviously you sit there and you listen as well as look. One study, we're told, asking students either to read a non-fiction book, so non-fiction, we're still talking about reading, but now it's non-fiction, or listen to the audio version, found no significant differences in how much they absorbed. So we're talking about listening to stories, to fiction, or listening to non-fiction, to factual stuff. And according to this paragraph, listening to either is just as good as reading it. So what is the irony? That these snooty people think that it's unserious and it's not good enough and that it's some kind of cheating. So if we went back to our question, what is the irony? You might say something along the lines of people see reading as superior to listening, but in fact there is no difference in how much people remember when they've consumed a text in 2 different ways. Or people see reading as cheating when they're reading stories, but they don't see listening. Sorry, they see listening as cheating when they're meant to be reading stories, but they don't see listening in a theater or listening in a lecture as cheating, as long as you're using but. So I always teach my students, you answer an irony question, X but Y. You're using this word but to show the marker, I've seen the contrast. Hello, marker, here's the contrast. Look, 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 I've got it. So the marker comes along and gives you the mark for the whole thing. This, but that. Now, it's out of 3 marks, so I would include at least 2 examples of irony. So people see reading as superior, but it's not actually. And people see listening as cheating in some circumstances, but in other circumstances it's perfectly acceptable. So I would do 2 because of the 3 marks. And so I would find more than 1 example of irony, but always this, but that. You can use other words like yet or however, but I really think it's important that the marker sees that you've seen the contrast. So I teach X but Y, this but that. That's how you answer an irony question. One 1.6, home language are now splitting this kind of question the way you would see it in your first additional language exams. So we're told to refer to a particular paragraph. Please make sure we do. We have to identify and comment on. And we said comment on is the same as discuss. It's the same technique. So there's an explanation plus your own opinion. Then the key word, this is tricky. The key word is tone. And candidates find tone very difficult. Tone is feeling. So what are the questions that are asking you to identify feelings or emotions? Tone, attitude, atmosphere, and mood. Now, what makes this so difficult is usually if the paragraph or the sentence or the line is read out loud to my students, they can hear, they say, yeah, okay, we can hear it. Usually the irony, the ironic tone, they can hear it. But when I ask them to identify the tone, they don't have accurate words. So tone is difficult as a question because it is asking you for vocabulary. Now, learners have been falling back on happy, sad, and angry. So a number of years ago, both the home language and the first additional language markers have been told, be very careful of happy, sad, and angry. Unless it's absolutely accurate, do not accept it. The students must find a really accurate word. So for 1 mark, you identify the tone, and then you have to comment on the suitability. So what makes it suitable? It's suitable or it's unsuitable depending on the context in which the word is used, the purpose for which the word or the sentence is used, and the impact that the language is meant to have on the audience, on the people reading or listening. So you need to say it's suitable because this is where it's being used. This is why it's being used. This is why it's being used. And this is the effect that the writer wants to have on the audience, on the reader. And if you think it is not suitable, you can say so. I would think that because it's only out of 2 marks, that the examiner thinks it is a suitable tone. And so you would then say, this is what the context and the purpose and the impact are, and therefore this is why it's going to create the right purpose or the right impact. I would go with an agreement. Here we move from comment on to critically discuss. It could equally be critically comment on. So what is the difference? Usually, the critically discuss suggests that you look at both sides of something. So if it was critically discuss the suitability of the tone, if it was that question, you might say it's suitable for this reason but unsuitable for that. That's usually what's involved in a critically discuss or a critically comment on. But what you will find is that very often when I'm answering the exam paper, there isn't that opposite side. There actually isn't an alternative view or a weighing up, which I would expect when I use critically discuss. So if you can't find yes, but to this extent, but not that, then don't worry about the opposite side. Just make sure that you give some kind of explanation of what we are talking about, and then you give your own opinion, your own judgment with your reasons. And that should give you the 3 marks that the examiners expect. Do you see? There's sort of 1 mark for the explain, 1 mark for the opinion, and 1 mark for why I am saying what I am saying. And you'll usually find that that works in your exams. What do I have to discuss critically? The diction, conveying the writer's attitude towards what? Print media. And I have to provide, what do I have to provide? 2 examples in my response. So we've moved to attitude, and we said an attitude is a feeling. This is the feeling towards print media. So let's break this down. We've got to say that the writer's attitude is X, for which we assume we're going to get 1 mark. Then we've got to have 2 examples of diction. Then we've got to show how these 2 uses of language show the attitude. So diction is the choice of words and the use of words. So the choice and the use of language is diction. So what do I have to do? Establish what the attitude to print media is first, then give 2 examples of language, and then show how those examples show me that attitude. And that will be enough. Look at what we're doing. We are explaining the attitude. We're giving our opinion of that attitude. We are explaining how those words create that attitude. So let's go back and see if we can look at paragraph 7. So what are we looking for? Words that show an attitude to print media. So if we read this, we're talking about listening. It's harder to share. So you can share print media. You can leave it on a train. You can give it to your goddaughter. And what are you giving? Your dog-eared, spine-cracked copy, which meant everything to you when you were her age. You will buy print media. and you will find somebody else's faded notes. And you will find a long-forgotten postcard that makes you want to know more about the life of the person who sent it. Paper does not render itself useless in a power cut. So paper is always useful. All right. Try to keep your choice of diction as short as possible. I really wouldn't quote, you can recommend a podcast to a friend, but you cannot leave it on the train seat for the next person when you get off, as I have done all my life with finished newspapers. I wouldn't even quote from there to the end there. It's too long. Choose something short. We've only got 2 examples. So I would say, I might include 2 of them here. You can share and leave and give and buy. So all these verbs suggest, what do you feel about print media? If I can share it and I can give it to you and I can buy it for you or buy it for me, that there's an appreciation of print media. The speaker values print media, takes delight in print media. Those are all attitudes. Appreciates, values, delights in. Those are my attitudes. So I've identified an attitude. I've got a short quote, buy, share, leave, give. And then I explain how that shows the attitude. Because you can pass something on. You can really enjoy in a physical, tactile way. I can buy a second-hand book. I can give you my copy. So there is a physical connection to it, which shows the love and the appreciation and the enjoyment. Right, I need a second quote. You might want to choose this dog-eared, spine-cracked copy. The marking guidelines suggest focusing on this, and you can see why. Dog-eared is where you've turned down the pages. Spine-cracked, you try to open the book and the spine broke, because some of the glues they use these days are terrible. But what else does it tell you? It tells you that this was a book that was read and reread, was propped up at breakfast, and maybe you splashed some coffee on it or whatever. It's been something that you've really loved and valued and appreciated. So you choose 2 short. If you look at the other things that I've marked, maybe even give your goddaughter. That's a lovely quote. It suggests sharing with somebody who's so important to you. Or finding somebody else's faded notes and feeling a connection to that unknown reader. The long-forgotten postcard. Again, a connection to somebody else who was also reading it. I love this. It's not useless in a power cut. Well, we know all about that, don't we? So, any of those, but just 2. Right, this is a very typical question. So what makes something, our keywords, an appropriate conclusion? You need to look at the topic of the passage, of the text as a whole. If the text is about cold and bitter winter weather, and then the conclusion is about traveling on a train, I don't see a connection. So you're looking for the topic, you're looking at the final paragraph, and you are making a connection. So it could be with the topic. It could be with the theme. You could look at tone. Has the whole passage been serious, and is the conclusion appropriately serious? Or possibly you could look at some kind of contrast. So the whole text has been about bitter cold, and the final paragraph says something about, so you're going to find me on a beach in Mauritius in the sun. So the contrast is appropriate because it's drawing attention to how cold and bitter and miserable everything is because you're out of there. Or the tone. Has the tone been quite serious, and does it end in a much more light-hearted way? Is there a change in tone, and is that appropriate, and if so, why? So what are you doing? You're looking at the article as a whole. You're looking at the final paragraph, and you are making some kind of connection. Remember that your marks are for your justification. You can't say, yes, it's appropriate, or no, it's not appropriate, and expect 3 marks. It's not going to happen. There are no marks for saying yes or no. You need to say the final paragraph is appropriate because of whatever. There's a connection in the topic is sustained, and then explain. So it's in the justification that you are getting your marks. This is where the 3 marks are coming from. There are always questions on a text B, and text B will have visual and usually verbal as well. We're looking at the second part of the comprehension question, which says questions on text B. So as usual, we do our question words, refer, and how. So this is a how question. How is in what way? It's 2 marks, and we're referring to the verbal text. So you will see if we go back to that part of the question, the verbal text has been reprinted for you. It's there, but it's also typed up again for you. And you have to say how this makes a more enjoyable journey. Then we've got identify how and provide. So we've got, what have we got to do? We've got to identify the imaginary jungle depicted in the visual image. So we're going to the visual. Please be very careful about the difference between the verbal and the visual. Please make sure that you pay careful attention. Verbal, the words, visual, what you see. So first of all, we've got to identify that imaginary jungle in this visual text. Then we've got to show how it's depicted. So we've got to describe, identify how we are describing. And then we've got to provide the purpose, which is why. So we're being asked, why is it depicted in the visual image at all? So let's go back. And I found this a little tricky because I actually couldn't see very well. So I loved the hat. Let me take what about a light blue? So I loved the hat. I could see the hat, and I thought the hat was absolutely fabulous. And I could see, I think it's a bit pale here, but I could actually see this leopard jaguar creature over here, right? Definitely that was okay. But then I really battled. I didn't know what this was. I could see it was something or other. And first of all, I thought, well, is it a butterfly? I thought, is that a wing and a wing? Is this a butterfly? But eventually, if you look over here, this is the head of the snake. Okay. And then you can see there's something over here. But again, what is going on? What is over here? So I battled to see. Now, obviously, the examiners are going to make sure that we can see as well as possible. But you can't always predict exactly how it comes out. But I can see enough to see that the jungle is both outside the car, because I'm seeing this creature over there through the car window, and the jungle has come in on her shoulders and on the steering wheel. And I love the hat. I really did. So how is the imaginary jungle depicted? By showing us animals and the hat. Right, okay. Then it says why. So now I really have to have looked at this. Take an adventure through the Amazon. Your commute just got a lot more interesting. Thousands of books to choose from. You can listen to your favorite adventure novels. Lovely. My imagination can explore the jungle. So I've got it. So let's go back to the question. Identify how, so the animals are drawn over, well, outside the window and over her, and then provide its purpose. It's to show you that she's listening and her imagination is working and the jungle is inside the car and outside and everywhere. So it's showing you how powerful the story is. So if you subscribe to this app, you're going to enjoy your journey. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. Now we have a comment on question. So what did we say comment on or discuss meant? Explain something for a mark, give an opinion, and give a reason. 3 marks. What am I commenting on? What are my keywords? Effectiveness of the portrayal of the woman in conveying the message. So I've got to start with the message of text B. And the message is if you have this app, if you are connected to the site, you will have access to all these amazing novels that you can listen to. That's the message. Right. The portrayal of the woman in conveying the message. Okay, let's go back and look at her. Well, how does she look to you? I think she looks pretty focused. It worried me a little. Is she focused on the jungle that she's listening to and the story, or is she focused on her driving? Right. But let's start with she's focused. She seems to be relaxed. That focus doesn't look miserable. It looks enjoyable. So an enjoying focus, and she's young. So she's an attractive young woman who looks as if she's having a wonderful time as she's driving, and so I can have an equally amazing trip if I listen to stories provided by this app. Remember, I did say when you are critically commenting on something, you can say that it's not effective if you want to. I would go with the easier answer. And then always, they have the comparative question. So we are told to refer, we're told to discuss critically, right? And we're told to look at paragraph 4, text B, text A. So our keywords, both our texts, the extent to which text B supports the subheading, something else I have to look at, text B, subheading, and paragraph 4. So how do I look at the extent? This question is asking me how much, how far. So you can say completely, you can say not at all, sorry, or you can say in the middle. So the subheading and paragraph 4 of text A. We did look briefly at the subheading. It was from audiobooks to podcasts and voice notes. There's a steady generational shift in the way we understand the world. And paragraph 4 is this. Reading is still very far from dead. Lockdown rekindled the love of curling up with a good novel, to publishers' delight, with more than a third of people claiming to be reading more to fill their days. But the audiobook market, while still small, also notched up its 7th year of double-digit growth. Millennials, in particular, seem to be all ears. We are told that Katie Vanek Smith admitted recently that when its members, mostly under 39, were asked what they wanted to read, they said they listen. But their parents do so too. All the overloaded, frantically multitasking midlifers try to keep up with whatever zeitgeist they're afraid of missing out on in an information-saturated world while going for a run or cooking dinner. So you can say yes, no, or in the middle. So what did we have in the subheading? It says that the younger generation is listening more to audiobooks, podcasts. And paragraph 4 tells us that the audiobook market is increasing, and millennials in particular seem to be driving that market. Under 39 years old, they say that they listen. Then we have their parents also listen, the midlifers who are multitasking. Okay, so does text B support that? I would say yes and no. So we have, for me, yes, to the extent that she looks like a millennial, she is attached to her story while she is driving. So it definitely supports the idea that the younger generation, she's clearly a young woman, the younger generation are listening to stories and podcasts and much more connected or auditorily. Then I would say no, in that she is clearly not the parents of the millennials. She's not a midlifer. She's 40 to 50 years old. Absolutely not. She is multitasking, but she's not part of that older generation. So multitasking, yes, but not the older generation. So do you see there's actually plenty for you to say? It's really a very, very nice question. We've got to get 4 marks. We've got to look at a subheading and paragraph 4 and text B. We've got to describe what's in there. We've got to give our opinion, and we've got to make the connections. And I think there's plenty there. It's a very, very nice question.